Hello, and sorry for being a little late. Um, so I'm here today to talk about mastering the mobile testing pyramid, and let's jump into it. So just a little bit about me. I'm Laurent, so the co-founder and CTO of Waldo. 3 years in Waldo. In the and I started 5 years. So the goal of Waldo is that allow people to create and orchestrate all their mobile automation concepts directly from the browser and to be a lot of interesting insights for the customer. So, mobile testing, why is that so important? We can say that even more than for anything like web, mobile testing is super important because the deploy cycles are much longer. You cannot really do this on the fly deploys, and it's very hard to revert or push the hotkeys because you need to go through the approval process. Hello? Is the sound better now? I heard the sound was really bad, so I was asked to wait a bit. So maybe I'll still take from here. It's just gonna skip about me, but which is not the most important part of the talk. So yeah, this is the start of the presentation for mastering the mobile testing pyramid. And I was just getting into why it's so important to test mobile. So mobile has longer deploy cycles. You cannot really do any hotfix. It has to go through the approval in the App Store. And then it's very hard to force users to update unless you have over-the-air updates, which is not always the best idea. Then whatever the user wants to keep as their version is what they're gonna have. So it's super hard to, when you have a bug, it's very hard to eliminate it from being run in production. So it brings us to the subject of the talk today, which is the mobile testing pyramid. So I'm guessing most of you are familiar with the testing pyramid. The size of each layer is actually the size of the volume of tests you can put it them usually. So the bottom is unit testing. You're usually trying to look at a specific part of your architecture, and you're trying to see at the implementation level details if each of the method and blocks are actually behaving properly. You have the integration testing on top, which is usually at the layer of a service. So for instance, you have a backend service and you want to verify that for the given input, you're going to get the expected output. So it's still testing in isolation with everything else that you have in your system, but it's considering each service as a black box. You don't need to know how it's done inside. You're just testing the public interface it has. And then you have on top the end-to-end testing. And end-to-end testing is really trying to be in the user's eyes. What are they going to see when they use your app? And this is what's the most important part when you want to really be confident that the end result of what you're deploying is going to be what you expect. So unit testing is super cheap to create. They are usually very fast to run, but they give you a very scoped confidence about some parts of your system. Integration testing are usually a little longer to run, a little harder to put in place because they still have, for instance, if you have a backend, you want to have a DB, you want to have some stuff with that. And then the end-to-end testing is where you have the most challenges because since you want to test your system as a whole, you want to really be able to emulate what the end user will see. That's the most complex to actually put in place. And so at the top of that, on the left side, we put manual testing because end-to-end testing actually doesn't need to be done automatically. So the way to do that is usually either you have someone running them or you have a program running them. And so we're talking mostly about that today. I wanted to give the pyramid to put things in context, but we are mostly interested about the end-to-end testing layer at the top. So the big struggles, especially for mobile when you're doing the end-to-end testing, is that it tends to be hard to put in place, which usually leads to having the results being a little unreliable. When you're doing manual testing, especially, it's very, very hard to scale. So you're going to have tons of devices at your disposal. You're going to be able to run all the scenarios, remember what you have to run. And every time you have a new version, you're going to have to redo everything again. And on the scripting side, which is the other way of doing end-to-end testing traditionally, you usually end up having people, when you ask them what they think about scripting, is that it's a little brittle and flaky. And it usually leads, because of that, to noisy results. And if we wanted to be just like summarizing what that means is scripting is very hard to put in place and get right. It's a very big problem in itself, and it requires a lot of attention if you want to get to actually results that you are confident in when you see them. So one of the biggest thing of the talk is two statements. The first one is that mobile testing, as anything else that requires programming, is an engineering problem. So when you look at automating testing, you want to really consider that to be following the same rules that you follow when you're doing the rest of code. So race conditions is a problem. It has to be divided architecturally and strategically so it makes sense. There are building blocks. You don't really want to say, oh yeah, automation is simply trying to encode what a manual user does. And the second statement is probably more, not unique, but a little bit more unorthodox. But I really believe that when you want to do automation, you really have to separate two sets of problems: the automation of your app and the automation of your tests. So making this distinction really helps putting a good testing strategy in place for mobile, because that allows you to see that they are actually requiring very specific needs on both sides. So when you are building, that's what we've decided to be the core principles to do successful automation end-to-end testing for mobile. You want to be able to automate your app. Only then do you want to automate properly your tests. And finally, you want to build a proper strategy around that. The order here really matters. And in fact, you'll see that if you only do one, you're already gaining a lot of stuff. And you might not even want to do 2 and 3. Just having one has a lot of value by itself. If you try to go to 2 right away, you're probably going to have 0 value, because that's when you're going to get flaky and noisy. So what do we mean by automate your app? I know it's a little bit like conceptually harder to understand what do we mean by that. So automating your app is basically saying that you should be able to get to any place and any parts of your app in a simple, quick, and repeatable way. Which means basically you should be able to have a way to put your app in such a state that if you open it, you know exactly what you're going to see. In other words, you need to be able to predict how your app is going to behave. And you need to be able to have ways into the different modes of your app. So for that, both it's easier to have an example to see what I mean. Imagine you have an app that requires to be, that has different sets of logins. So you want to be able to see what a power user sees and when they are admin. So traditionally, if you want to do that, you're basically just going to be trying to get a specific account, get there and see what they can do. But then now imagine you have something that's about a specific experience that happens only if you have not logged into an app for the last 10 days. How are you going to test that repeatedly? If you have an account like that you kept, well, every time you're going to test, you're basically breaking this thing that you've not been active for 10 days. So you're basically blocking yourself from testing for another 10 days on this account. This is a problem. But you want to be able to test this feature. It's a core part of your app. There's a specific thing about retention. This is important for you to re-engage a user that has dropped for a while. So you really want to know that this works. So what we mean by automate your app is allowing you to get in a very repeatable way into that mode of the app that says, hey, this is what happens when a user has not logged in for a very long time. And traditionally, the way to do that are actually pretty simple. They require to change your app itself. And they are usually about, adding a debug mode in your app. There's a lot of things like that. You check your phone and you get a debug menu where if you're not in a production release, you can see things like, I don't know, toggle your server to be talking to staging, loading a few fixtures. And in this case, you could say trigger experience for late, or what would we call it, for re-engagement. Let's call it that way. And so that's why I was saying that this part is super important. So imagine now you're, again, trying to automate your tests based on what is the experience when the user has not logged in for 10 days. If you don't automate your app first, whatever you're going to do in your testing, you're not going to be able to get anywhere because, again, you don't have a way to put your app so that it shows like that. You could say that you're going to create an account and have your test wait for 10 days and then do the steps, but I think we all agree that would not be the greatest idea. And the thing is, when you do that, the automation of your app, not only you're going to prepare yourself so that you can do successful automation on top, but you're also making your manual testers happy because they need to be able to do that. They also struggle. They also need to have ways to test all the features available in your app in a way that's super easy. Basically, you want to allow a repeatable way to test the diversity of and the exhaustive set of features that you care about. Now, automating your test is pretty simple. We all know about it. Anyone that has done scripting has basically started this part. A script is a way to programmatically control your app. There are many ways to do it. And there are some hints. So just as a disclaimer, as I said in the beginning, I don't know if you were here I don't know if the sound was good at that time to hear, but Waldo, we offer some way to not require scripting to do all this automation of your tests. But no matter what, if you are trying to consider how you're going to automate your tests, meaning how you're going to be able to programmatically encode or basically to allow automatically replaying some user flows inside your app, you should probably consider two things. You want to automate the user experience and not the code, and you want to have some loosely coupled test and development. So the first one, what does that mean? End-to-end should be as close to what a user sees and not close to the code. So a proper way to automate tests should be that it relies on what the user actually is going to interact with. In other words, saying that you are clicking on the button is okay. Saying that you are clicking on the button that says whatever accessibility or that has such and such XPath is going to be extremely brittle. It's completely based on the implementation details, but doesn't correspond to the user experience. A good rule of thumb from the one is that whatever automation for testing you use, if ever you decide to change all the IDs in your app, that should not actually impact the testing. That's going to allow you and allow all the developers to say that they can confidently change and refactor parts of their app without having to fear that they're going to completely break all the test suite that's on top of that. The second part is that your test must be still based on what's going on the code side. So usually you don't want to rely on whatever implementation details in your test, so that it should be written in an agnostic form of whatever has been written on the other side. However, there needs to be a one-way communication. So the test needs to know what's the version of the code and what branch it is, but it should not have to be able to poke into the internals of the code. And then this is what we've really built around at Waldo. So there's a very good way to know that you have made it. Your goal when you're talking about automating your test, first automating your app, then automating your test, is that you're going to get to repeatable, deterministic, and isolated tests. So the first one is simple. If you do a sign-up flow against a real server and you reuse the same email address, the first time it's going to work, the second time it won't. The backend is going to say this email is already taken. That test is not repeatable. That's clearly not going to be a successful automation. You're going to run it once, and then it's always going to be red. The second one is deterministic. Imagine you have A/B testing, and they are randomly assigned. So whenever you're signing up to the app, you are basically putting A or B, and then your onboarding is going to change. That's also something that you cannot automate. And that part is really about automating your app and not automating your tests, right? That's where you see that the goal is to make your app behave in a consistent manner so that from your testing and automation side, you know what to expect. So then now you know exactly how to test it, because you are now going to say, I want to do things and I want to check them against my expectations. And the third one is super important if you want to scale. So it's only important if you want to run in parallel, but your test should be isolated. If you're running two tests that are modifying the same user profile and you're running them at the same time, each test is going to actually impact the other one, and that's bad. So you're not going to be able to get isolated tests that way. And so that part is the last one, usually the hardest to get to, but it's really, if you have the three, then you're going to be good. Now, we talked about build a proper strategy. So the proper strategy is, now that you've done that, so you've been able to get some automation, so you've been able to have tests that automatically run and that check for your app health and test all your features. Now, what do you want to do? You basically want to consider what we said at the beginning of the mobile pyramid, of the testing pyramid. That's really mobile specific in that case. End-to-end is expensive because they require to talk against a real server. They are usually longer to run. They are usually longer to put in place. So with your end-to-end testing, you really want to decide what are you going to test with them. And what we think is super important is you want to test the essence of your app. You have an e-commerce app. What's the most critical part of it? People should be able to create an account, people should be able to log in, and people should be able to check out successfully. You have a list of core user journeys that are driving all your business metrics, right? These are the ones that you absolutely need to succeed. You don't really need to do any defensing testing in end-to-end. Things like, oh, what happens if a user tries to log in with a Gmail account and we have something that only wants to have professional email address? It does not matter that much. It might be good to see that it works, so you might want to have one test like that. But clearly, one thing that you never want to do in end-to-end testing is now say, oh, but what if I try with Yahoo? And what if I try with iCloud. These things are not important to test in end-to-end testing because they are about the lower level of the access control or something, but they are not really allowing you to know when a user is going to use my app, they're going to be able to use it the way I've intended it to be used. So super important, end-to-end is not meant to be comprehensive. You don't want to cover it all. You want to cover your basics. And then that's what it looks like. So now the other thing is you want to be able to run at will. So you have your pyramid, and then you have another thing that can be some kind of the same idea. You want to be able to run a specific set of tests for a specific nature of build. So as you're developing, you're going to have some PRs and you're going to have some builds that are only impacted by a change from one place. There, you probably want to just say, hey, I'm going to test that I didn't break everything. So let's just verify that there's no crash and I can still log in. And that's it. You don't need more, right? You're just trying to see that you have not broken the app in any meaningful way. And then the more you go to the top of the pyramid, it's the same idea. The less you want to, the more expensive it is. And so the more you have to think about what you want to put in it. So the smoke tests at the top is basically going to be, hey, you want to have your app released and you have built your beta and you have, delivered it internally and people are using it. Now you want to run the full suite of everything there. And I guess that's it. So how do you know that you made it? So if you have a good proper strategy in place, you should be able to know that your PR does not break. You should be able to, but just for small things, you should know if your main branch is good. And then you know before you're releasing a beta that it covers all the things in your app. And then, well, the benefits, everybody's going to be happy. Your customers, your developers, everyone. And that's about it. So I wanted to say, here's a QR code if you want to try Waldo for free. So Waldo is going to basically allow you to do all the good things that we said about automating your test, but it doesn't try to cover automating your app, which is still on the developer side. But it allows you that once you have an app that's automatable, to really automate it quickly from the browser without having to maintain any scripting, code, anything like that. And if you have some questions, I'm really happy to answer them. I think we have 3 more minutes. And so I'll try to be quick on that. Thank you very much. Okay, not sure if there are any questions. I don't see any. So again, please don't hesitate to go check out Waldo for a bit more of that. What is the Q&A? I do not see that. Great question. So if end-to-end testing does not test for edge cases, who does? That's exactly what you want to cover in your integration or unit testing. So if you have a component that changes color when you have an invalid input, you can just do that, right? You send a lot of inputs to it and you verify that it always reacts to the right form. And then if you have something that's a bit more involved, probably in integration testing. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it.